I was a TV weatherman for more than 40 years. I talked about floods and storms and tornadoes and blizzards and ice storms and all kinds of things. And when I wasn't talking about that, I was talking about what you could see in the sky. Things like eclipses, meteor showers, various planets, and so on. But I'm not the weatherman anymore. But I still have a lot to talk about. Well, hi everybody, and welcome to episode number 10 of, or as we used to say up in Miami County, Indiana, 10. It's 10 o'clock time to wash the dishes, but that's the way we talk. My grandma especially used to speak that way. And one of these days I'll talk about the what I believe to be the dialect that we have in this part of the world. You know, people who are from the South, you can almost always tell somebody from Alabama or someplace like that because they have that Southern accent. And there are also times when those of us here in the Midwest, the way we speak is a real giveaway to our location. So at any rate, I just completely diverted from what I was going to talk to you about. So at any rate, welcome to the show. It's called Hey Kevin. I've addressed this before, but let's do it again. It's called the Hey Kevin Show because when I was doing the weather at Channel 10, it was about 1987, I think, and we had a news director named Jim LaBranch. And Jim would watch me do the weather and so on. And he called me in the office one day and he said, I like the way you talk on the air, and you seem real personable. What we're going to do is go out and record people saying something like, "Hey, Kevin, what's the weather going to be?" And then you answer it on the air. That's what he told me. So we did it, and that went on for years and years and years. I think it started in about 1987, and still to this day, when I go to the store, I'm out somewhere, I'll many times, more often than not, hear, "Hey, Kevin." So that's where that came from. And it has been going on for a long, long time, and we decided to keep it going with the Hey Kevin podcast and what I call the Hey Kevin Show. So we usually do an interesting word, a weather word, and I'm going to do one today that I think you'll maybe get kind of a kick out of. And the word is cryologist. A cryologist no, it's not somebody who's a counselor or something like that. A cryologist is a person who studies snow. That's right, a person who studies snow. Yes, there are people who do that. They're scientists and they study the crystalline structure of snowflakes and how snow falls and so on, and the effects of snow when it falls and how it affects us, we people. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. First of all, there is no doubt that we have been going through a pretty difficult winter. One of the strongest winters we've had in some cases 30 years or more. Now, this goes with my belief that I've had for many, many years that weather runs in cycles. And I believe that you can go back 30 to 50 years and so on and start to see patterns repeating themselves. So that's what I believe is going on here once we get into winter. And a really strong winter like the one we are having is essential to the overall health of the earth. Now, I know it's cold and icy and the snow and everything, but this winter is doing exactly what it should be doing. This is a nearly perfect winter. I know you've maybe had some frozen pipes or problems, but this is a near perfect winter. And here's the reason. It's times like these that we have to think about the benefits of winter. Snow, for example, you get a nice blanket of snow on the ground, and it's an excellent insulator. A blanket of snow can keep ground temperatures relatively stable. Now, the ground temperature is going to be quite cold, especially when it's frozen. It'll be at least 32 degrees or so. But the air temperature above it might be 5, 6 degrees below zero. So the snow acts as an insulator to the earth beneath it. And so that's really, really good. Now, snow can also be a gentle watering system. So, especially when the snow melts slowly. So, this snow we have on the ground, we'll keep our fingers crossed that it melts off slowly. Now, I know the winter is beginning to break a little bit. And so we're getting a little bit of melting and so on. And what's happening is the ground is being gently watered by this melting snow. That is, if it doesn't melt too quickly. If it melts too quickly, and the ground is still a little bit frozen and so on, it'll run right off into the rivers and streams. And that's when we have floods. Some of the biggest floods we've had have occurred in the springtime, just coming out of a winter and into the spring. So, at any rate, snow is a very good insulator. But what about the cold? Now, maybe you've heard somebody say, and I've heard it many, many, many times, well, we need to have a cold winter to kill all the bugs. To a certain degree, that's true. But the fact is, bugs are pretty resilient. And over the course of the last 50 to 60 years, some of the things I've read here indicate that bugs actually adapt to colder weather. So let's say 50 years ago, cold air that might have killed one bug or two bugs or whatever, those bugs that might have been killed years ago might survive today because they're adapting to current conditions. And so that's what's going on. And the bugs get a little bit knocked back as far as their overall population. But it's not really correct to say that a cold winter kills all the bugs, because it doesn't. It might slow them down a little bit. You might have fewer bugs, but for the most part, the winter doesn't really go along to kill the bugs. Especially, ticks. I read on this. Ticks can withstand temperatures of up to 2 degrees below zero and even colder than that. And so if you're hoping this winter is going to get rid of the ticks, that's probably not going to happen. So another thing that cold weather does, another benefit of winter, is it's eliminating mold spores and so on. So the air is a little less aggravating to your sinuses and your eyes and so on when you have very cold air. And of course, there's an economic benefit to winter too. Maybe you've noticed that. I talked to somebody the other day and he said, I won't tell you where he went. He says, I went there to get a snow shovel and they were all sold out. Yeah, snow shovels selling out, salt for the sidewalks and so on. It's hard to find. Well, that's an economic boost. But there are also people who suffer economically when it gets like this, when the winter gets very cold and snowy. One of the downfalls is you have businesses that are closed or people can't get to the store or whatever. And so that's a bit of a problem. So winter does have an economic boost for some, but maybe not for everyone. I'm reminded that a good old winter, actually, is a good thing. My grandma Pottinger, you've heard me talk about her from up in Deedsville, Indiana. My grandma Pottinger used to say, a good snow, a good year, because the snow is helping to helping the nutrients in the ground. Also, it's helping to insulate the ground and also watering it. And maybe it's getting rid of a few bugs. And so that's one of the benefits of winter. Now, I'm going to continue here and talk to you about winters that we have had in the past here in the Wabash Valley. And this really is really something quite interesting. So there have been 5 major winter storms in recent history that I did some research on. The blizzard of 1978 is probably the one that really comes to mind. It was from the January 25th to the 27th in 1978, and we had wind speeds of more than 50 miles an hour. There are some snowfall amounts, actual snow on the ground of a couple of feet. And with the wind and the very cold conditions and just everything getting snowed in, Every road in Indiana in 1978, during the blizzard of 78, every road in Indiana was closed. The Indianapolis airport closed. It brought many people here in the Midwest to an absolute standstill, and that's what happened in 1978. Maybe you remember. We had a big snow in 1982, although it was named the blizzard, the St. Louis, the St. the St. Louis blizzard of 1980. The wrath of the storm actually did hit parts of the Wabash Valley. The snow began on January 30th and lasted through the 31st. Leaving in its wake snow totals of up to a foot in Terre Haute and farther south. That was in 1982, a big snow then. Now, here's one that I remember vividly, and that is, maybe you do too, the cold blast of 1989. The cold blast of 1989. We had just moved. With our little girl, little Christine, who is like 2 years old. We had moved to another house, into a neighborhood, and we had this cold air coming in. It was an Arctic blast, hit the region with record-setting low temperatures between December 19th and the 23rd. The low temperature never got above 10 degrees below zero. Everything froze. Natural gas lines failed. That happened in our neighborhood. Because of the air pressure. Cold air is very, very heavy. And so the air pressure, the barometer was very high and it was pressing down and so on. And some gas lines, that is natural gas lines, had trouble delivering the gas to furnaces or water heaters and things like that. And so there were gas people going through our neighborhood trying to relight people's pilot lights and get the gas going again because the very cold air interrupted the ability of the gas to get into some areas. Power lines snapped because of the frigid cold. You see, it was just very, very cold. Another one that I think you might remember was back in 2011. That was the big ice storm we had around here in 2011. It started off as a light freezing drizzle in the afternoon of February the 1st. All right, so it was around this time of year. It started off as a light freezing drizzle. The freezing rain continued overnight, and the temperature dropped to 18 degrees with a 14-mile-per-hour wind. Now, when you put ice, maybe a half an inch, a little bit more of ice on tree limbs and power lines, it adds a lot of weight, and you add wind to that, and they snap. And that's what happened in 1989. This whole area was a glaze of ice for a few days because of the big ice storm in 1989. So you see, we've had winters like this in the past here in the Wabash Valley, and I'm certain we'll have winters like this again. It's possible we could actually be getting into a pattern where we have a series of winters like this. And if you get used to it, maybe you can eventually enjoy it. Now let's do a weather quiz. Today's weather quiz has to do with the calendar, all right? And so the weather quiz it's just simple. It's a true-false question. And remember, I might be trying to trick you up. So here we go. The year 1752 contained only 282 days. Again, the year 1752 contained only 282 days. Is that true or is it false? Think about it for a few seconds. True or false? Yeah, it's true. It's true. 1752 had only 282 days. Well, there must be a reason for that, right? Well, there is. And the reason will probably confuse you more than not. But here we go. Before 1752, Britain and the British Empire followed the Julian calendar. Now, that was established by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. But the Julian calendar, every 128 years, lost a day. See? And so every 128 days, the calendar would get off just a little bit. And you know what that did? That affected the date of Easter. Easter must occur near the vernal equinox, the first day of spring. And so they found that it was starting to drift, you see. And so it was decided that there should be a change. And so Pope Gregory, back in 1582, decided, well, we're going to have to change that. So what they did in 1582 is this. Each month was consisting of either 30 or 31 days, with 1 month, February, consisting of 28 days. A leap year every 4 years was added to February, 1 day in February, making it 29 days long. This was the Gregorian calendar. It's called the Gregorian calendar because it was Pope Gregory who established it. Well, he made that decision in 1752, but it wasn't until 1782. I'm sorry. Let me take this back. He made that decision in 1582. That's when Pope Gregory made that decision, 1582. It wasn't until the 1700s that the calendar was actually adopted by the British Empire. So listen to this. You want to talk about goofing up the calendar. Here we go. December 31st, 1750 was followed by January 1st, 1750. March 24th, 1750 was followed by March 25th, 1751. December 31st, 1751 was followed by January 1st, 1752. September 2nd, 1752 was followed by September 14th, 1752. Crazy, huh? And so it wasn't until the 1700s, after the decision was made in the 1500s, it wasn't until a couple of hundred years later that the British Empire finally adopted the Gregorian calendar. But that affected festivals and holidays and so on, and it just turned out to be a real mess. And if you followed your genealogy, if you have ancestors that go back to, let's say, your family tree goes back to the 1700s in Europe or the United States or anywhere, you may get to a problem because of that gap in days, see? Because we just dropped 11 days out of the calendar. 11 days disappeared from the calendar in 1752. They're gone. Where are they gone? They never existed. And so that's what's going on with the calendar. And speaking of which, finally, the calendar was adopted by Britain and all of its colonies and so on. That was adopted in 1752. But I mentioned the genealogy. Get this. Here in February, we celebrate George Washington's birthday. Now, George Washington was born in 1732, and he was born on February the 11th, 1732. But what happened was the change of the Gregorian calendar caused Mr. Washington's birthday to then be recognized on February the 22nd. So even though George Washington was born on February the 11th, because of the calendar change, we now celebrate his birthday on the 11th because 11 days were taken from the calendar. Think about that for a few minutes. Just think about that. Can we actually remove days from the year? Apparently you can, if you're the Pope. I was talking just a few moments ago about George Washington. And I also want to talk about another president whose birthday we celebrate in February, on February the 12th. That is Abraham Lincoln. By many accounts, Abe Lincoln is most people's favorite historical president. They just loved Lincoln. And the thing about Mr. Lincoln is that he had something in his personality that many of us may also have, and that is depression. And in Mr. Lincoln's case, it was severe depression, especially in the wintertime or when it was rainy and cold and windy and so on. He was prone to depression, especially in the wintertime. And so, what we look at is Mr. Lincoln's life to see if we can figure out why. It's probably safe to say that he was genetically predisposed to depression. His father was very prone to depression and kind of weird behavior. And so, Mr. Lincoln, as he grew up, you may have heard the story when he was in southern Indiana, had to build like a lean to cabin. And I don't think his dad was with him at that time. He had a companion and so on. And it was just a rough life. And then Mr. Lincoln went to in Illinois and so on. And so he's moved around right around where we live. And it's also possible that some of the same land that you're walking on is some of the same land that Mr. Lincoln at one point did. But back to my point here. He would get very depressed. And people close to Lincoln were actually quite concerned about his depression. At 26, his first love was Anne Rutledge. And Anne Rutledge died in 1835, and that triggered a round of depression for Lincoln. His grief was so intense at that time that he's quoted as saying, "I can never be reconciled to have the snow, rains, and storms beat upon her grave." So every time it snowed or rained or stormed and so on, he's thinking that that's raining on Anne Rutledge's grave, and it depressed him. He also actually had to do with a lot of other things that happened in his life. He lost a bid to become part of the General Assembly in Illinois. The defeat, coupled with his romantic loss, deepened that melancholy. Mr. Lincoln suffered from these symptoms: loss of interest in activities, difficulty concentrating, thoughts of death. In fact, friends of Mr. Lincoln interviewed to prevent potential self-harm, removing sharp objects from his room, and actually, it was quite a concern to the people around Lincoln. So how did he deal with his depression? Because he would get quite glum and want to be alone and not talk to anyone. And something else too, I found out when I was when I was doing my research for this, he was a heavy smoker. You never saw a picture with Lincoln, I don't think, with a cigarette or a pipe or a cigar. But apparently, Lincoln was a heavy smoker. He did not drink. He was not known to be a drinker, but he was a smoker. So, by today's standards, Abraham Lincoln suffered from clinical depression. So, how did he deal with it? Well, one of the things he liked to do is tell jokes and witty anecdotes. Self-deprecating jokes, which means he made fun of himself. And so he tried to alleviate his grief and his melancholy and his depression somewhat by telling jokes. But what I want to say to you is this: if you are subject to depression or glum or whatever, when the winter is dark and so on, and gloomy and snowy and rainy and cold and icy, if you get those emotions, those feelings, you're not alone. Now, the thing about this today is we have much more of an awareness of depression and how it can affect a person. Certainly, it made a big impact on President Lincoln's life, but also it can make an impact on people nowadays, here in 2026. So if you suffer or know somebody who suffers from depression, there is no shame in seeking help. There is no shame in reaching out to say, "Hey, I feel rotten. Let's talk." You may find that helps. This winter has no doubt been one of the coldest winters we've had in quite some time. I was talking to you about 1989 when it got really, really cold. And also in 2014, remember, it got very cold then. And so now it has been also quite cold. One of the reasons that it's been cold is because of the polar vortex. I'm sure you've heard about that. And the polar vortex stays at the top of the planet most of the time, just circling around, containing all that cold Arctic air. But every once in a while, it loosens up and wiggles around, and that Arctic air can spill down and affect us here in the Wabash Valley and even as far south as Florida recently. It's been quite cold down there. And so, one of the reasons that the polar vortex loosens up and wiggles around is because of a warming, a heating in the upper stratosphere. So the stratosphere is the layer of air above the troposphere. So the second layer of the atmosphere. It gets warm up there. And when that happens, it disrupts the polar vortex and it gets all wiggly and we get cold, thanks in part to warming in the upper atmosphere. Now, somebody asked me at the store the other day, and I like this. They said, Kevin, we've had all these solar storms and these auroras and so on. Is this energy that is being spit out by the sun and now hitting Earth's atmosphere? Is this what's causing the warming of the stratosphere? And in turn, is this causing us to have much colder winters? Not directly. The warming of the upper stratosphere may have a slight increase in temperature, very, very slight because of the active sun. But mostly that's not the case. And so I would hesitate to make a direct connection with an active sun, warming of the stratosphere, and the polar vortex. But it's interesting to me that these are all three now occurring. It's something to think about. And here's something else to think about. That is the fact that this has been the 10th episode of the Hey Kevin Show. Now, when I see you at the grocery store, because that's where I go mostly, or the grocery store or wherever, don't hesitate to ask a question or to email me or get in touch with Dreamer Productions, and we'll see if we can come up with an answer for you. In future podcasts, I'm probably going to talk about flying saucers. That's going to be something that you'll want to tune in for. In the meantime, I want to leave you with the way I was talking about Abraham Lincoln, and I think I'm going to paraphrase this, but he had a great quote saying, "People make up their minds to be just about as happy as they want to be." Boy, is that true. Words from a wise man, Abraham Lincoln. Bye-bye.